"Old woman, go live your life." Those were the words my son hurled at me. Sharp enough to cut through bone. Loud enough for every neighbor to hear. It happened right there on Maple Street, in front of the houses where I'd watched him play as a child. For a moment, time froze. The air felt heavier, the sun too bright, and every sound, the barking dog, the rustle of leaves, disappeared into a silence so thick it pressed against my chest. He stood there, angry red-faced, while Patricia tugged at his arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. My hands trembled around the handle of my worn floral tote. The same one I'd sewn 15 years ago when he was still kind, still mine. I wanted to speak, to tell him that I had given him my entire life, but my throat locked. The words died behind my lips. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Mrs. Henson, watering her geraniums, froze mid-motion. A couple walking their dog slowed down, pretending not to stare. I could feel their pity like needles on my skin. He called me old woman, not mom, not mother, just old woman, as if I were some stranger who had wandered too far from where she belonged. I said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because saying anything would have shattered me completely. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized that somewhere along the way, the boy I had raised with trembling hands and endless love had disappeared. What stood before me was someone else, someone cold, unrecognizable. He turned away first. They both did. Their car doors slammed, the engine roared, and just like that, they were gone, leaving me standing alone on that quiet street with humiliation burning my cheeks and my heart twisting inside my chest. I remember gripping the strap of that tote bag until my knuckles turned white, whispering to myself, "Don't cry here. Not in front of them. Not in front of everyone." That night, I sat in my small kitchen, the clock ticking too loudly, the air heavy with the smell of burnt tea. I replayed his words again and again until they became a whisper inside my head. Go live your life. So I did. But not in the way he expected. 3 days later, while he sat comfortably in the home I helped him build, he received something from me. A message that changed everything. A message he'll remember for the rest of his life. Before I tell you what happened next, if you love true stories that prove it's never too late to stand up for yourself, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Now, let me start from the beginning. My name is Teresa, and I was 68 when my son shouted those words at me. But to understand how a mother ends up being called an old woman by the very child she raised, you need to know where our story truly began. I was born with nothing special, just a pair of steady hands and a stubborn heart. When my husband, Daniel, died in a road accident, our son Jacob was only 6. I still remember the sound of the rain on that night, and the way his small fingers clutched my sleeve as I told him his father wouldn't be coming home. That moment shaped both of us. I could have collapsed, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to the corner of the room where my mother's old sewing machine sat, and pressed my palm against the cool metal. If these hands can stitch fabric, I thought, maybe they can stitch a life back together too. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment then, cracked paint, uneven floorboards, and a kitchen so small that if Jacob opened the fridge, I had to step aside. Yet, inside that tiny space was warmth. I sewed clothes for neighbors, school uniforms, party dresses, curtains, anything. Some nights, I'd work until my fingers ached so much that I couldn't hold a fork. Jacob would fall asleep beside the humming machine, using piles of soft fabric as his pillow. When he woke up in the mornings, I'd pretend my eyes were red from the lamp, not from tears. But those weren't sad tears. They were a mix of exhaustion and pride. He'd grin and say, "One day, Mom, I'll buy you a big house where you won't need to work anymore." I'd smile and answer, "All I need is your happiness, son." And I meant it. For years, that sewing machine was our heartbeat. It stitched through every struggle. It kept food on the table when no one else would help. Sometimes we only had rice and eggs for dinner, but Jacob never complained. He'd help sweep the floor, pack finished orders, and carry them to the clients after school. The neighbors would often say, "That boy was raised right." And I would feel a quiet pride bloom inside me. When he turned 16, Jacob started talking about college. He wanted to study business management. To make money the honest way, he said. I laughed and told him, "That's what your father used to say before he met me." But secretly, I prayed he'd get that chance. My education had ended early. My family couldn't afford to keep me in school. So I decided my son's future would be different. By the time he got his acceptance letter, I was working 12-hour days. The tuition fee, $3,750 a month, looked like a mountain I could never climb. I had no savings, no insurance, nothing but that small apartment my mother had left me before she passed away. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Every wall held a memory. The night Jacob showed me his letter, his face glowed with excitement. "Mom, I got in." "But the fees." His voice trailed off, guilt flickering in his eyes. I hugged him tight and whispered, "Don't worry about it. We'll find a way." And we did, though it broke my heart to do it. I sold that apartment, the only thing I truly owned. I moved into a small rental near the industrial area, a place that smelled of dust and oil, but I didn't care. When I signed the papers and handed over the keys, I felt like I was cutting off a piece of my past. But when I saw Jacob smile, it felt worth it. Every month, I sent the tuition payments early. I skipped new clothes, skipped medicine when my joints ached, and saved every coin in a glass jar labeled Jacob's future. I never told him how many nights I fell asleep on the sewing table. I wanted him to see only strength, never struggle. When graduation day finally came, the auditorium was filled with proud families holding flowers and cameras. I sat alone in the back row, wearing my best navy dress, hands trembling as they called his name. Jacob Martinez, Bachelor of Business Management. He walked across the stage, tall, confident, his black gown shimmering under the lights. He found me in the crowd and waved. In that moment, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear had meaning. After the ceremony, he ran to me, lifted me off the ground and whispered, "Mom, everything I have is because of you." I laughed and cried all at once. It was the happiest day of my life. When Jacob got his first job at a logistics company, I thought our hard days were behind us. He started buying groceries, taking me to the movies on weekends. Sometimes he'd bring me small surprises, chocolates, perfume, or flowers from a street vendor. He'd call me my queen, and say he'd take care of me for the rest of my life. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I remember once he said, "You've done enough, Mom. It's my turn now." Those words made every stitch, every scar worth it. We lived quietly, comfortably. My workshop grew. I hired 2 young women, and we'd laugh while sewing orders. Jacob was proud of me, or so I thought. I imagined growing old with his laughter filling the house, his future family visiting on weekends, my grandchildren running through the garden. If only I had known how quickly love can change its language. How a son's voice, once full of gratitude, could someday echo with resentment. Back then, I had no reason to fear. I still believed family was forever. I still believed respect, once earned, could never be lost. But life, as I would soon learn, has a cruel way of testing the strongest hearts. And it began the day he brought her home. I still remember the day Jacob introduced her. He came home one Friday evening, his hair perfectly styled, his shirt crisp. He never dressed that neatly unless it was for something important. "Mom," he said almost shyly, "I want you to meet someone." His tone carried excitement I hadn't heard since graduation. I smiled, my heart swelling with curiosity and hope. Every mother dreams of seeing her child find love. Her name was Patricia, and from the moment she walked through the door, I felt something inside me tighten. She was beautiful, tall, elegant, with nails so polished they gleamed under my kitchen light. Her perfume arrived before she did. When she smiled, it didn't quite reach her eyes. I had spent the whole day preparing for their visit, cleaned every corner, cooked his favorite chicken pot pie, and laid my best lace tablecloth, one I had crocheted by hand years ago. When they sat down, Patricia glanced around my small dining room, her gaze lingering on the old sewing machine by the window. "You sew?" she asked, her tone light but her smile sharp. "Yes," I replied proudly. "I've been doing it since Jacob was little. It's what kept us going." She nodded, picking at her food. "That's cute," she said. "Not kind, not warm. Cute, the way someone describes something outdated and small." I laughed softly to hide my discomfort, but Jacob noticed. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That gesture told me he still saw me, Still remembered the woman who had built his world stitch by stitch. But it didn't last. A few months later, he told me they were getting married. He was glowing. I was terrified. They had only known each other for 8 months. I tried to be happy for him, to push away the unease clawing at my chest. If she makes you happy, that's all that matters, I said. And I meant it, or at least I wanted to. The wedding was grand. Chandeliers, white roses, a string quartet. Patricia had planned everything, every glittering detail. I helped pay for half of it, even though I couldn't afford it. $18,000. I told myself it was tradition, that a mother should give what she can for her son's happiness. During the ceremony, she floated down the aisle like a queen. I watched Jacob's eyes shine with love, and for a moment, I believed my fears had been foolish. But after the wedding, everything began to shift, subtly at first, then sharply. The visits became fewer. Calls turned into short, polite check-ins. Whenever I offered to visit, Patricia always had an excuse. The baby was sleeping, the house was messy, they were tired. I told myself they were just busy. Newlyweds need space, I thought. But space soon became distance. The first time it truly hurt was when Jacob called me by my name instead of Mom. It was during a phone call about something trivial. I think I asked if he needed any repairs done at the house. He sighed and said, "Teresa, we've got it covered." Teresa. My name sounded strange in his mouth, like it didn't belong there. When I hung up, the house felt emptier than usual. Even the ticking clock seemed louder. Months passed. I made dresses for Patricia when she asked, expensive fabrics, delicate lace. She barely thanked me. Once, she even complained that the stitching looked handmade. Handmade. The word that had once meant pride now sounded like an insult. When Patricia became pregnant, my heart lit up again. A grandchild, a second chance at family, at laughter in the house again. I began sewing tiny clothes, crocheting soft blankets, dreaming of holding that baby in my arms. But when Melissa was born, I wasn't allowed to see her. Patricia said her mother was helping, and that the baby needed rest. Too many visitors can be stressful, she told me sweetly. I smiled and said I understood, but inside I broke. Weeks passed before I finally met my granddaughter. She was perfect, soft cheeks, brown eyes just like Jacob's. I held her for less than 5 minutes before Patricia took her back, saying it was feeding time. My arms still felt warm from her tiny body long after they left. That night, I cried into the half-finished baby blanket still folded on my sewing table. Every visit after that became a negotiation. I had to call ahead, ask politely, and hope Patricia would agree. Sometimes she said yes, but more often no. Today's not good. Melissa's not feeling well. We're going out. The excuses blended into one long, cold wall of rejection. Once, I arrived unannounced, carrying a small doll I had sewn for Melissa. Patricia opened the door, her face a mask of polite annoyance. "Oh, Teresa, we weren't expecting you. The baby's sleeping." I hesitated, holding out the doll. "I made this for her." She looked at it, forced a smile and said, "How quaint." Then she took it and closed the door. When I visited again a month later, I didn't see the doll anywhere. I asked about it, and Patricia shrugged. She got bored. We donated it. Something in me twisted that day. Not anger, not even sadness, just a quiet realization that I no longer belonged in my son's world. Jacob never defended me. When I tried to talk to him, he'd say, "Mom, don't make things difficult." Or, "Patricia just likes her privacy." I wanted to scream, "Her privacy? What about my dignity?" But instead I smiled, nodded, and went home to my empty kitchen. Then came Melissa's 4th birthday. I waited for an invitation that never came. A week before, I finally called. "Sweetheart," I said gently. "What time is the party?" He hesitated. "We're keeping it small this year, Mom. Just her classmates." The following weekend, I saw pictures on social media, balloons, cake, a crowd of smiling guests. Patricia's parents were there, friends, neighbors, everyone but me. I stared at those photos for a long time. The decorations were pink and white, the theme princesses. Melissa looked beautiful. I tried to tell myself it was fine, that she wouldn't even notice my absence. But I couldn't escape the ache inside me. That night, I sat at my sewing table and pulled open the drawer where I kept her unfinished doll clothes. One by one, I folded them neatly, packed them into a box and closed the lid. That sound, the soft click, felt like the sound of something ending. 3 months later, Jacob stopped by. My heart fluttered. Maybe things were changing. But he wasn't alone. Patricia stood behind him, smiling politely, carrying a cheesecake. I should have seen it then, the charm, the sweetness, the setup. They wanted money. Jacob talked about an investment opportunity. A smoothie franchise that could double returns in 6 months. He needed $95,000. Just a loan, he said. You'll get it all back, Mom, with interest. I looked at my son, the same boy who once promised to take care of me. And I knew this wasn't his idea. Patricia's eyes said it all. I hesitated, and she smiled, saying softly, "Don't you trust your own son?" That sentence would haunt me later. I said yes, because that's what mothers do. We say yes even when we know we shouldn't. If I had known how that choice would unravel everything, how it would lead to the day he called me old woman, maybe I would have found the courage to say no. But love can make even the wisest hearts foolish. And mine, after a lifetime of giving, still hadn't learned how to stop. The day everything fell apart began like any other. Quiet, ordinary, almost peaceful. I had just finished watering the small plants by my porch when I saw them walking down the street. Jacob, Patricia, and little Melissa. For a second, my heart leapt. It had been months since I'd seen my granddaughter up close. She was wearing a pink dress with tiny white flowers, her hair tied up in 2 small buns. "Melissa," I called, my voice trembling. She turned, her eyes lighting up. "Grandma," she squealed and ran toward me, arms wide open. I bent down, tears already filling my eyes as I wrapped her tiny body in my arms. Her warmth filled the empty spaces inside me. But that moment didn't last. "Melissa, come here." Patricia's voice sliced through the air. I froze as Jacob and Patricia strode toward us. His expression was cold. Hers was furious. "Mom," Jacob began, "we've talked about this. You can't just show up like this." I looked around. The neighbors had stopped what they were doing, Mrs. Henson by her garden, Mr. Martin wiping his car. I whispered, "Show up?" I was at my own house. She saw me and came to say hello. Patricia crossed her arms, her tone sharp and condescending. "You really don't understand boundaries, do you, Teresa? You can't just insert yourself into our lives whenever you please." I felt every eye on me. My hands shook. "I'm her grandmother," I said softly. "I just wanted to say hi." Patricia laughed under her breath. "Your granddaughter? Melissa has parents. We decide what's best for her." I turned to Jacob. "My son." My voice broke. "Jacob, please." And then he said it. "Old woman, go live your life. Leave us alone." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. The words hung in the air like smoke, poisonous and heavy. My knees nearly gave out. The same boy who once clung to my skirt, who promised to take care of me, had just reduced me to that. An old woman. A burden. Everything around me blurred. The flowers, the houses, the neighbors' faces. All I could hear was the echo of his voice. "Old woman, go live your life." He turned away, took Melissa's hand, and walked off without looking back. Patricia followed, satisfaction flickering in her eyes. I stood there alone on that sidewalk, gripping the handle of my faded floral tote until my fingers ached. I didn't cry, not then. I couldn't. Pride and pain battled in my chest, and pride won at least for that moment. When I finally went inside, I locked the door behind me and slid down to the floor. That's when the tears came. Years of exhaustion, disappointment, and love collapsing all at once. I pressed my hands to my face and whispered his words again, as if testing their weight. "Go live your life." How strange that such cruelty could sound like freedom. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sewing machine that had carried us through everything. My fingers traced the rusted edge of the metal. It had always been a symbol of survival. Now it felt like a relic of a life I no longer recognized. Around 3 a.m., I rose and opened the drawer where I kept important papers. Jacob's college receipts, the loan agreement, the title of the apartment I had sold for his education. Each document told the story of how deeply I had loved him. And then somewhere between heartbreak and clarity, I decided I was done begging to be seen. I folded every paper neatly, placed them in a small envelope, and set it aside. Tomorrow, I thought, I will start over. But not out of spite. Out of self-respect. When dawn came, I stepped outside to feel the morning air. The world looked different. Colder, sharper, but also clearer. My heart still ached, but under the pain was something new. Resolve. I realized that the woman Jacob called old was the same woman who had once built an entire life from nothing, who had faced death, poverty, and loneliness, and survived them all. If I could survive that, I could survive this too. That afternoon, I went to town, withdrew what little savings I had left, and bought a small suitcase. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I wouldn't stay where I was no longer respected. When I returned home, I sat down to write. The first line came easily. You told me to live my life, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I stared at those words for a long time. They didn't sound like surrender. They sounded like rebirth. By the time the sun set, my decision was made. I would go. Not as a mother abandoned, but as a woman reclaiming her dignity. I would leave behind the silence, the humiliation, the begging. And in my place, I would leave something for Jacob. A message that would make him remember not the weak woman he thought he could cast aside, but the mother who once gave him everything and still walked away with her head held high. That night, I packed my bag and took one last look around the small house. The scent of lavender from the garden drifted through the open window. I whispered softly into the empty room. You were right, Jacob. I'm going to live my life. And with that, I turned off the light. The morning I left, the sky was gray but calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, packed only what mattered. A few clothes, my sewing kit, the old photo of Jacob as a boy holding his first bicycle, and the letter I'd written the night before. The message he would remember forever. I moved slowly, deliberately. Every fold of fabric, every zip of the suitcase felt symbolic, like I was stitching the last seam of a life I had already outgrown. I looked around my small kitchen one last time. The chipped mugs, the faded curtains, the clock that had ticked through every sleepless night. These things weren't just objects. They were witnesses to a lifetime of love and sacrifice. But I knew it was time to go. Before stepping outside, I placed the envelope on the dining table. His name was written in my neat, careful handwriting, Jacob. It wasn't heavy, yet it carried the full weight of my heart. Inside was not bitterness, not anger, just truth. The letter began. My son, you told me to live my life. Today, I am obeying you. Not out of spite, but out of love, for myself. I realized I cannot keep waiting for kindness where it no longer exists. I gave you everything, and in return, you gave me absence. Still, I forgive you. I only hope that one day, when life humbles you, you'll remember who stood beside you when no one else did. I signed it simply, Mom. I closed the door behind me and locked it gently, not out of anger, but for closure. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. My footsteps were shaky, but each one felt lighter than the last. At the bus station, I sat by the window watching the streets roll by. The same ones where I had walked Jacob to school, where we'd shared cheap ice creams on hot afternoons. The town grew smaller in the distance, fading like an old photograph. I didn't cry. I just breathed. My destination was a small coastal town 4 hours away, a place I had once visited with my late husband, Daniel. It wasn't much, a quiet village where time moved slowly, where the sea whispered instead of roared. When I arrived, I rented a modest room from an elderly couple who ran a flower shop. They didn't ask questions. They just smiled and offered me tea. For the first few days, I didn't know what to do with myself. My hands kept searching for purpose, for something to mend or fold or wash. Then one morning, as I watched the shopkeeper's wife arranging flowers, I asked if she needed help. She smiled and said, "We always need good hands." So I began working there, trimming stems, tying ribbons, wrapping bouquets in paper that smelled faintly of rose and mint. It was simple work, but it grounded me. I found peace in small things, the rhythm of scissors, the hum of the ocean outside, the laughter of children passing by. At night, I would sit by the window of my rented room, looking out at the waves. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't Jacob's mother. I wasn't the woman who sewed through nights of hunger. I was simply Teresa, a woman who had survived and still had breath in her lungs. People in the village began to know me as the quiet lady who makes beautiful bouquets. Some of the younger girls came by for advice or to borrow fabric scraps. I didn't tell them my story, I just listened to theirs. Somehow, in helping them, I started healing myself. One afternoon, a customer came in, a woman about Patricia's age, holding her little boy's hand. She said she wanted a bouquet for my mother, who's been feeling lonely. Her words caught me off guard. I smiled, blinking back the sting in my eyes, and wrapped the flowers with extra care. When she left, she turned and said, "You remind me of her, strong and gentle at the same time." That night, I took a walk along the beach. The sun was setting, painting the water in soft gold. I closed my eyes and felt the sea breeze on my face. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to live. Not just to exist, not to serve, but to live, for me. I wrote Jacob again that evening, though I didn't send the letter. I wrote to release the words I had held in my chest for too long. Jacob, I hope you're well. I think of you, of course, a mother always does. I am learning what peace feels like. It's strange but beautiful. I used to believe my worth depended on being needed. Now I know that love isn't proven through pain. It's proven through respect. I pray you find that lesson too. I folded the letter and placed it inside the drawer of my nightstand, next to a seashell I'd picked up from the beach. Weeks turned into months. I began to smile easily again. My laughter, once quiet and cautious, became natural. I even joined a small community sewing group. Together we made blankets for local shelters. It felt good to give again, but this time without losing myself in the giving. Sometimes, I'd catch the scent of Jacob's favorite dish, or see a young man helping his mother across the street, and my chest would tighten. But instead of pain, there was acceptance. Some loves aren't meant to stay close. They're meant to teach you what to let go of. And in that letting go, I finally found freedom. I had lived my entire life waiting for permission to rest, to breathe, to exist beyond my role as someone's mother. Now, I didn't need permission anymore. I was living my life, just as he told me to. Only not the way he expected. 2 months passed before Jacob realized I was truly gone. I didn't expect him to call right away. Pride runs deep in our family, his from youth, mine from survival. But on the 3rd Sunday of the 2nd month, as I was arranging white lilies in the flower shop, my phone buzzed. His name appeared on the screen. For a heartbeat, I froze. My hands trembled, a lily stem slipping through my fingers. Then I exhaled, wiped my palms, and let the phone ring until it stopped. I wasn't ready. Not yet. That night, I opened my small notebook and wrote only one line. He called today. That means he's read the letter. I had imagined that moment so many times. Him finding the envelope on my table, opening it with irritation first, then confusion, then silence. I knew exactly how his expression would change as he read each line. In that letter, I didn't accuse or scold. I told the truth, plainly, without bitterness. I reminded him of the little things he had forgotten. How I sold our home so he could study, how I sewed until my fingers bled to pay his tuition, how every thread I pulled through the fabric carried a prayer for his future. And then, I told him something I had never said before. I don't regret a single sacrifice, but I do regret forgetting who I was when I made them. Love that costs your dignity is too expensive to keep paying. Those words weren't written to wound him. They were written to wake him. A week later, a letter arrived at the flower shop. No return address, just my name in his handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a short note. Mom, I don't know where you are, but I read everything. I'm sorry. Patricia and we've been having problems. I wish I'd listened sooner. Please call me. I didn't call. Not out of spite, but because his apology wasn't ready yet. It came from guilt, not understanding. There's a difference. Later, I heard through a mutual friend that the business he'd poured my money into had failed. The smoothie franchise never opened a second location. Patricia left shortly after. My son lost nearly everything, except the lesson he'd tried so hard to ignore. Sometimes, Life has its own way of returning what's owed. A month later, he sent another letter. Longer, rawer, written by a man who had finally looked at himself honestly. Mom, I don't deserve forgiveness. I used you, hurt you, and turned you into a stranger. I thought success made me powerful, but I see now it made me blind. I found the papers you kept, the tuition receipts, the house deed, all of it. I never knew how much you gave. I feel ashamed just writing this. I've lost everything, but maybe that's what I needed to remember what matters. Please just tell me you're okay. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it next to the first one in my drawer. My heart ached, not with anger, but with an old familiar tenderness. A mother's heart never stops loving. It only learns to love differently. That evening I wrote back. Jacob, I am okay. More than okay. I am at peace. Pain has a strange way of clearing the fog. You don't owe me money, apologies, or grand gestures. You owe yourself a better version of the man you were. That's all I ever wanted. Remember this. Forgiveness isn't a door others open for you. It's one you unlock for yourself. I didn't send the letter right away. I waited a week, then mailed it with no return address. I didn't want him to find me, not yet. The next Sunday, as I walked along the beach, I thought about how different everything felt. The ocean roared softly, the horizon stretched endlessly, and for once, I wasn't haunted by what I'd lost. I had written the truth, set it free, and now it belonged to him. To carry, to confront, to learn from. 2 weeks later, a small package arrived. Inside was a framed photo of me and Jacob at his graduation, smiling so brightly it almost hurt to look at. Beneath it, a note. I keep this picture by my desk now. It reminds me of who I was before I forgot how to love you. Thank you for teaching me one last time. I cried quietly that night. Not the way I used to, not from pain, but from release. For the first time, I felt a strange balance between loss and peace, grief and grace. Justice hadn't come through revenge, but through revelation. He had learned, and I had healed. When I walked to work the next morning, the world looked softer. The sea breeze brushed my face like an apology carried by the wind. I whispered into it. I forgive you, Jacob. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was simple, and that simplicity was the most powerful thing of all. The seasons changed quietly in the little coastal town. Summer melted into autumn, and I found myself growing older without feeling old. My days followed a rhythm I hadn't known before. Calm mornings, honest work, quiet evenings filled with tea and the sound of waves. There were no raised voices, no waiting by the phone, no anxious questions about whether I was still loved. I began to understand something profound. Peace doesn't always come wrapped in grand moments. Sometimes it's found in ordinary silence, in the scent of lavender drifting from the flower shop, in the laughter of strangers, in the steady rhythm of your own breath. I often walked to the shore after work. I'd sit on a bench, my shoes sinking into the sand, and watch the tide rise and fall. The sea had become my mirror. Calm at a distance, restless underneath, always moving but never rushing. It reminded me that healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens in waves. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I saw a young couple walking along the beach with their little boy. He was holding a toy boat, squealing with delight as the water touched his toes. The mother laughed, brushing sand from his knees, and the father wrapped his arm around her shoulders. I felt an ache, not painful, just wistful. Once upon a time, that had been me, chasing dreams beside a man I loved, carrying a child who would someday call me mom. But instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. I had lived a full life, not perfect, not easy but full. Weeks later, I received a small envelope in the mail. There was no name on the front, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Inside was a single photograph. My granddaughter, Melissa, smiling wide, missing her front tooth, holding a drawing of a flower bouquet. Beneath it, a short note. Grandma, Dad says you make the best flowers. I drew one for you. Love, Melissa. My hands shook as I traced the little drawing. Bright colors, messy lines, pure joy. I turned the photo over and saw a few words from Jacob. Mom, Melissa's been asking about you. I told her everything. She'd love to meet you when you're ready. I sat there for a long time, the sound of the ocean filling the room. My first instinct was hesitation. After all, I had spent so long building peace, and I feared reopening old wounds. But then I smiled. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing peace over pride. I wrote back the next day. Tell her I'd love to meet her. And tell her her flower is the most beautiful I've ever seen. We met 2 weeks later, at a small cafe halfway between my town and his. I arrived early nervous, holding a small bouquet of daisies, Melissa's favorite, according to Jacob's letter. When they walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked older, humbler, softer. There were new lines on his face, the kind that life carves when it finally teaches you what matters. Melissa ran to me immediately, her laughter bright as the morning sun. "Grandma," she shouted, throwing her arms around me. The warmth of that embrace filled every empty space I'd carried for years. Jacob stood there quietly, watching us. When our eyes met, I saw it. The apology he couldn't put into words. He didn't need to. I nodded slightly, and that was enough. We spent hours together. Melissa talked endlessly about school, about her friends, about how she wanted to learn to sew, like Grandma. Jacob listened, his smile small but genuine. I didn't ask about Patricia, and he didn't mention her. Some stories don't need to be retold once they've already taught their lessons. When it was time to leave, he hugged me. Hesitant at first, then tight, as if afraid to let go. "Thank you," he whispered. I smiled. "Live your life, Jacob," I said softly. "This time do it with kindness." On the bus ride home, I stared out the window, watching the world blur by. The past no longer hurt the way it once did. It had become a teacher, not a wound. The next morning, I returned to the flower shop and arranged a bouquet, white lilies, yellow tulips, and soft green ferns. I placed it by the window with a small handwritten card. To new beginnings, and to the courage it takes to start again. Life continued, simple and beautiful. I still sewed in the evenings, but not for money, for joy. I made quilts for the orphanage nearby and taught a few local girls how to mend clothes. Their laughter filled the little workspace, and every sound reminded me that giving doesn't have to cost you yourself. Sometimes, I still think about the words Jacob shouted that day. "Old woman, go live your life." They used to echo like a curse, but now I see them differently. They were, in a strange way, a blessing in disguise. His cruelty forced me to rediscover my own strength. His rejection led me to self-respect. His silence taught me the value of my own voice. I didn't leave because I stopped loving my son. I left because I finally learned to love myself. Now, when I look at my reflection, I no longer see an old woman. I see a survivor, a mother, and most importantly, a woman who learned that it's never too late to begin again. The sun sets outside my window as I finish telling this story. The sea is calm tonight, the horizon painted in orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Jacob is tucking Melissa into bed, maybe telling her about the grandmother who once sewed his dreams together with thread and faith. And I am living my life, just as he told me to. Only now it's on my terms. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I share real stories like mine. Stories that remind us that respect has no age, dignity has no expiration date, and it's never too late to choose yourself and start again.